A few objectives that we want to talk about today. We really wanted to come here and talk a little bit about some of the history around what learning management systems are, for those folks that already have them, or for those folks that are considering them. There's a lot of work that goes into kind of thinking about and implementing learning management systems. So we'll talk briefly about the history as well as some of the characteristics of online learners, especially adult learners that you may be trying to reach. We're going to review the phases of LMS adoption. So the way we've structured this session is according to the pre, during, and post-implementation phases of a learning management system. So we've done that as well as break the session down into case study. So we're giving you an opportunity to interact with an example organization that is phasing in a learning management system. And we've provided you with a corresponding checklist to kind of weigh the checklist against the case study to see whether or not they're doing what they need to be doing in implementing a learning management system. And then finally, we hope that we'll engage you in this process. So we're mixing it up. You might have been talked at all day. Today you'll be talking to us instead. Okay? Any questions? Okay. So for those folks that are interested in participating, and especially for the folks who are watching the live stream right now, and even for the folks in the audience, we are encouraging you to participate in one of our 2 classrooms that we've set up today. Both require both require registration, and they're both free. Okay, so you can easily set up, and I'll just go through the instructions quickly. For the Google Classroom, you'll go to www.classroom.google.com and click on the plus sign on the right-hand corner, and then our class code is X3MH2WM, and type the classroom code and click to join. So you'll have to create a Google account if you don't already have a Google Classroom account. Okay, so if you want to take that code down, because that's the most important thing, I'll leave it up there for just a moment. Edmodo is another free online learning management system, if you will, and it functions as an online classroom that you can immediately set up classroom environments. You can set up learning spaces to engage your audience without actually having to purchase a learning management system. So for this one, you'll go to www.edmodo.com. You'll create an account, and then you'll click on Get Started as a Student. And the code for this class is S as in Sam, X, is it S? S as in Sam, the number 6, R as in Rabbit, and the number 2. Right. Keep the information. We've got a computer up here, so we're going to try to navigate if there's an issue, but it should be working as long as you create a Google Classroom account.
So before we move into the case study, I wanted to ask a question. Can anyone tell me what they think an LMS is? Just shout it out. Yes, that is what the acronym stands for. LMS is a learning management system. But can you describe what it is or what it should do? Yes, in the back.
So a way to track what your users have accomplished or learned.
Okay. So for those online, he said it's a way to track what your users have learned. I didn't catch the last part of it.
Whatever classes they're doing instruction.
For whatever classes or instruction. You are correct. So, an LMS has certain components that make it uniquely different from an e-learning platform. And this is an important distinction because an LMS is a software application or a web technology that does have a higher level of functionality when you're trying to train and teach and work with the learners in that environment. And so it allows you to plan for your learners, to implement that plan for your learners, to assess what they're doing and process and track it. A system is not necessarily an LMS if it's missing those advanced level features. And so if it doesn't allow you to run reports to assess where your learners might be encountering challenges or stopping or not completing parts of what you want them to learn, then it is probably just an e-learning platform, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're trying to create an LMS, you want to be able to monitor what your learners are experiencing. So, when you're using an LMS, we encourage you to consider the use of an authoring tool. And so an authoring tool is really any software that comes with pre-packaged templates. They're user-friendly because you don't have to be technically savvy to utilize these tools to construct your learning space. Essentially, these softwares have a lot of out-of-the-box content ready for you to utilize for your learners. And if you are going to be producing content, an authoring tool significantly reduces your production time, but it also makes it so that you don't have to create every single thing from the ground up. They assist you and really drastically reduce the time that it takes to get your LMS from start to finish.
And think about it this way. So who in the audience is interested in training staff on basic user functions like Microsoft? Okay. So in that case, Microsoft offers a lot of out-of-the-box tools that you can just purchase and host on a site. At LSC, we're working to create trainings on regulations that, if anyone knows LSC, no one else has really created any of these regulatory trainings. So we're having to create them from scratch. And so it necessitates an authoring tool in order for us to construct this. So think of the authoring tool as the back end of the learning management system. You use it to actually create those amazing courses that your users will ultimately have access to. If you're simply just looking to host content on management, basic user functions like Microsoft, you may not actually need an authoring tool because you don't have to author the content. You're not required to create it from scratch. Okay? Awesome. So really briefly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the history because it's after 3 and no one wants to be sitting here learning about history, so I won't bore you with that. But early online learners, in the late 90s, that's when we see kind of an explosion of the online learning scene. And we knew that the predominant amount of online learners had occupational, social, and family commitments. It was adult learners who could not get into traditional schools. We know that they had various learning styles. We know that they were all, they were visual learners, kinesthetic, auditory, and reading. And if you notice today, we're actually implementing all of those learning styles for the folks remote as well as the folks that are here. Those learners who possessed an internal locus of control, meaning that their self-motivation was responsible for their success in education, tended to be more successful in the online learning arena. So some of the emerging characteristics of online, specifically adult online learners, is that we know they have strong academic self-concept. So they are coming to it because they want to come to it. And traditionally, online learners are more successful when they're coming to it because they want to. They tend to exhibit fluency in tech tools. And this might be something that you actually have to train folks on. It might be that you're engaging them using a learning management system, but you have to train them on how to use that learning management system simultaneously. Most online learners like to engage in interpersonal communication, and they tend to have higher interpersonal communication skills. They value collaborative learning. That's one of the key characteristics of good online learning management systems, the ability for folks to collaborate remotely and to feel like they're part of the online learning environment. And again, they tend to be very self-directed. So pedagogical models, so I have a PhD in curriculum instruction, so if I were to really geek out, I'd spend a lot of time doing this, but I'm not going to do that right now. So two of the major dialogical models for online learning are exploratory and dialogical. So thinking about when you create online learning tools, an exploratory approach is often inquiry-based. You have a lot of examples of web-based modules, for example, that have quiz functionality, that give end users an opportunity to engage with the content. There are also opportunities to click into outside links that take them to the web and then bring them back. So the exploratory model of online learning engages folks in a way that allows them to participate. The dialogical model is a community-based, collaborative communication approach. And you find a lot of group discussions. You might have blog spaces, for example, in the dialogical model of online learning. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to talk briefly about the common pitfalls of the current learning management system process.
And we are having issues streaming in the Google Classroom. I'm not exactly sure why, but I'm going to keep trying to fix that. So, when you're developing an LMS, there are 7 common pitfalls that people tend to encounter or walk into. And so as you're working through the phase case study today, we want you to pay attention to these common pitfalls and really look for solutions or create solutions to how this sample organization, hypothetical organization, could either work around or preemptively try to avoid some of these common pitfalls, such as choosing a program that can't be integrated with your brand, not utilizing an entire team to implement this process, because implementing an LMS requires multiple team members and team subgroups, or it can. The interface is too complex, so it's overly complicated for the users and the managers to keep working in the long term. There's a lack of IT support post-implementation, so after it's already fully up and running. Over-customization, moving beyond what a vendor or you can keep up with when the contract ends. Underdeveloped training material, and having expectations that are way too high of what the system is capable of doing.
Okay, so we're going to walk you through phases, and as a side note, at Legal Services Corporation, we're actually going through that process right now. And I've been part of teams. I consulted previously with organizations who've gone through the process from research to implementation and then post-implementation. So at LSC, we'll say we're in the pre-implementation phase right now, but working very closely with a lot of these processes because we would ultimately like this to be a success for our grantees. So I'm going to go through some of the what we consider to be quintessential components of the pre-LMS phase, and you've got actually all of them explicitly laid out into the checklist, that white sheet that you have in front of you, or that white packet. So I'm only going to cover just the 3 that I think tend to get lost in translation. The first thing that anyone should do when considering a learning management system is do an organizational training needs assessment. Where are you starting from? What's your baseline? What are some similarly situated organizations that have a similar staff ratio, similar financial backing? What do they look like? And those steps are again laid out in the packet that I gave you. Developing and communicating the business case. I can tell you from experience, selling an often very expensive learning management system to someone that may not have experience in learning management systems may be difficult. And so it's really important to focus on developing and then communicating that business case. Why is it important for us to adopt an LMS? Assembling the stakeholder team is important, which I'll go through, and the requirements gathering process, and then initiating the RFI, holding your project meeting, and then the short list, which is your top 3 to 5 vendors. So I'm only going to focus on the 3 that are in green for today, and then we'll move on to our first part of the case study. Okay, so how are you developing and communicating the business case? Mostly folks want to know what it's going to be used for, and then how can you advocate for an LMS. So for those that are considering it and would like to go to someone in a leadership position and say, I really think this would be great for our organization, it's really first important to identify the business problems you're trying to solve. If you're simply trying to create a space to, I don't know, find out who's going to bring lunch every week and host that in an LMS, that likely is not going to be the best business case for you. So thinking about some of the problems you're trying to solve. So for example, simplifying the intake workers' understanding of the processes that you might have, for example, or training on complex LSC regulations would be an example of a business problem. It's really important to think about your organizational strategic goals and then cross-referencing those with the learning management system. So for example, if one of the strategic goals for your organization is to increase the number of closed cases per year, and the reason why that's not happening is because intake workers are not adequately trained, that might be an example of a strategic goal that would align with the implementation of a learning management system. Identifying SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely goals, in order to justify the cost, because we can tell you from experience that there are some very expensive learning management systems out there, some that are focused on the number of end users per month, per year. And there are some that are actually free and can host a lot of content and be really fantastic. And then you really want to get leadership buy-in. So if you lay out your project plan with benchmarks, that will help leadership kind of identify in 2 years, you'll be able to see a return on investment because you'll have this many folks trained, and then they'll be more affluent in a particular area. So those are the kind of areas that you can use to help make your business case for a new learning management system. So stakeholder teams, and I mean, we know that in many cases in legal services you're understaffed, and so this might not be possible because one person is running the entire process, from being the individual who will actually create the material, post the material, curate the material. But it's really important to have some sort of team to be able to bounce ideas off of, and it may not be a lot. You can see in our case it's just the two of us. So, but you also want to work with your IT department to kind of figure out what capacity and capability your systems might have. So you'll first start by establishing a project lead, and then you want to have some diverse stakeholders on deck. So, for example, some system admins who would be responsible for the back end. We work with our system administrators at LSC who manage the website in order for us to be able to post our content. E-learning specialists are the folks who would be authoring that content on the back end. And then maybe a project member and some other roles. Oftentimes individuals take on this project on their own and then find that they become extremely overwhelmed, or they may have a consultant come in and do it, and then the consultants leave, and then what? So that stakeholder team will become the team that basically carries this afterwards. And in my opinion, I think the most important process of the pre-implementation phase is the requirements gathering process. So it's important first to determine what kind of implementation type you're going to take on, and that's really dependent on the budget that you have. Some organizations might opt for self-service startup, which basically is most folks that don't have that much money. That tends to be from free to around $1,000 if you're doing it all on your own. And, some examples are some open-sourced learning management systems, like Moodle, for example, serves as an open-source learning management system. But you would essentially be responsible from everything from creating, curating, implementing, tracking, assessing, and evaluating. So that's one way. An assistant setup is working with a vendor or consultant to help you kick off the process. So they might come in, do the requirements gathering, help you find some vendors, and then help you assess the efficacy of those vendors. And that tends to be around the $1,000 to $20,000 range. And then a full service implementation can range from $20,000 to $100,000. So again, it's not cheap, it's really expensive. If you're looking for full service implementation and vendors who will stay with you for a while. You also want to determine the functional requirements, and this is a lot of the time what folks miss. So in our case, for example, we have as our authoring tool Adobe Captivate, which is the system that we're using to create and essentially build LSC's training materials. And before we did that, we had to ensure that whatever authoring tool we purchased could speak to our systems that we currently have. And so, has anyone heard of SCORM compatibility before? SCORM. I won't spell out the acronym for you, but essentially that ensures that whatever system you have can speak to the other systems. And so we wanted a learning management system that could potentially speak to our new grants management system that we're in the process of implementing, that could speak to our website, that could speak to any other systems that we want to implement. You want to determine whether or not the system that you're going to be purchasing has global capability. So, you know, what kind of language access, if you have a community of second language speakers, for example. Is it mobile friendly? So in our case, Adobe Captivate has an option for it to be just computer used or mobile friendly. And it's a very complex process to build a course that's mobile friendly. But you want to check all those things. Like, are your end users going to be folks that may not have access to computers? Are they simply going to have their smartphones? And then what kind of delivery model do you want? Are you hosting videos or PowerPoints, or are you actually creating modules? So again, all of those components are kind of explicitly laid out for you in that checklist. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to move to our first part of the case study. So if everyone can pull up the orange sheet that you've got in front of you, I'm actually going to go ahead and read through this first part of the case study, and what we're asking you to do is, in tables next to each other, so you can just turn your chair around, have a dialogue around what's missing. You can use the checklist as a cross-reference to look at whether or not they've implemented certain components in thinking about their new system. Okay, so Potomac River Legal Aid. Hopefully that's not a real place because we made it up, has decided to adopt a learning management system at the insistence of the board to help various roles in the organization. The roles and training needed include training new pro bono attorneys and volunteers on intake, training internal staff on internal policies and procedures, training attorneys at the organization on substantive law. The executive director has had conversations with some of her colleagues in the field about several systems that are promising. She tasks a group of staff, one administrative assistant and the IT director, to do research on systems and report back to her in 2 months. The budget for the system is a one-time $10,000 surplus from 2018, specifically from the technology budget. Okay, so what does everyone see as something that they might have missed in their pre-LMS phase? Right over here? You know, that's exactly right. So, and it's not a consensus, right? You need to have investment from everyone in the organization for this to actually work. I imagine that many of the folks at the organization are going to be like, I'm not watching this, I'm not going to this LMS, I'll just figure it out on my own. So yeah, that really relinquishes the value of the learning management system. What else do we see? Right there.
Well, related to that, right, I personally see having training needs that just necessarily justify the need for an LMS.
Right, so from the audience, it's having training needs just be the reason why you actually purchase an LMS. So again, it's a very complex process, and procuring a learning management system has many more steps, many long-term implications that need to be really kind of vetted and thought about before you actually go through. So what might another reason be for implementation rather than just a training need?
Well, to need to track and track training, that's a need.
Right.
So it's just a need.
Right, okay. So you could simply post training webinars on your website, and you could just post webinars, and you could post materials and resources. But if you're looking for the evaluative component that actually lets you know whether it's working, learning management systems are crucial for that. And I mean, that's taken a little bit of convincing on my part to kind of let folks know that we really want to know the efficacy of our training. Is it working? Are we just redundantly training our folks and not seeing any sort of, in my life, a return on investment is learning. So we want to see that, and having a learning management system really helps with that. What else is missing in pre-LMS?
I'm sorry, in the back?
So one thing I see is the mission that it's a one-time $10,000 surplus.
Right.
And evaluate those ongoing models for support.
Right. Okay, so we heard that there's a one-time $10,000 fee, and that'll solve all the problems, right? And that's not the case, because you have to think about updates on systems, and systems going out of business, and systems not functioning, and Flash is done, and what are we going to do with some of the Flash components that you've created? So yeah, not thinking long-term about the fact that this will be expensive for a while. It's only 2 people. And can 2 people realistically build an entire online institution? So that's a question that we're grappling with right now. And it's very clear that that's not going to happen. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on the content you're developing as well, right? And the intensity of the content. Again, if all the material that you're training your staff on is out of the box, purchase it from Microsoft, purchase it from we have BoardSource, for example, as an online vendor that helps our grantees understand boards. You can purchase it from BoardSource, MIE. If that's all you're doing, then maybe 2 people will work. But if you're really looking to create an environment for your learners, an environment for potential clients, for example, training them on housing, then you're going to need more than 2 people to not only create, but curate and manage on the back end. Okay, so we're going to move on to during the LMS. Jennifer's going to take you through that, and then we'll go through the second part of the case study.
So during the LMS implementation, there are a lot of planning considerations that you and the stakeholder team want to really work through. And so I'm going to highlight 2 right now, and then I'll go through the other bolded green ones. Migration is a very strategic process. That's because if you already have existing content in print or in an existing LMS, you have to make a plan for how are you going to, 1, transition that material into compatibility with the new system. 2, when are you going to move it? Are you going to move everything at once? I don't recommend that. Are you going to move it in phases? Are you going to tell certain people that they have a date when they have to migrate all of their content and convert it? But migration can come in 3 different forms. If you're transitioning from an LMS content to a new LMS, print to an LMS, or digital to an LMS. Either way, you're going to have to make a lot of decisions around who does what when. The other major consideration during the LMS implementation phase is thinking about your implementation. Again, are you going to have a phased approach where you move certain things at certain times, where you release certain content at certain times, or are you going to do the entire thing? Again, that can be a major decision. And so the other parts of the during implementation process are really some of the most time-intensive planning parts of utilizing an LMS. So, we recommend during the integration phase building out a timeline. And so this is an example of what a timeline might look like. What you might notice here is that this timeline is broken down by the milestones for the different goals that need to be accomplished. So there are technical implementation milestones, there are course migration milestones, integration milestones. So you see all those things that you have to consider when they're going to happen are all built in here. We encourage a milestone timeline just because you're going to have some parts of your plan where unpredictable things happen. And you want to build in extra time for those problems because we all know the best laid plans, right? They don't always work out. So if you build in time and you have the milestone as the goal, you can actually adjust. Maybe you get through one phase faster than another. You could dedicate that time to a different part of your plan. So production is probably the most time-intensive part of the during phase of the implementation process. And many people underestimate the production amount of time. I'm sure that is not a surprise to any of you who actually create content. Oftentimes we have lofty goals for our content and when it's going to be ready for release. But when you're organizing and developing your LMS content, you want to actually overestimate how much time that you think you're going to need. Because again, if you finish up early, that's great, but it's never a good situation to have a production timeline that you can't reach and then have things start to get backed up and backed up. You want to consider during the production phase, how are you going to develop engaging content for your learners? You always want to sit down and think about, are the predominant group of my learners read-write type of learners? Are they the kind of learners who learn by going through a simulation? Are they the sort of learners who I need to incentivize the amount of content that they need to get through? And so those considerations before you start production are really important for your LMS plan. And then finally, having a detailed plan ultimately of all the choices that you've made so that when you get into the production process, you don't have to regroup. Everyone knows what they're doing, what their timelines are, and what the expectations are of the final pieces of content. The next major part of the implementation phase is the training and testing cycle. And I want to emphasize that this is a cycle. Training is not something that happens by itself, and testing is not something that happens by itself. They inform each other. As you train your users, and users come in a lot of different forms, on how you want the LMS to function, what the capabilities that they have are in the system, and as you roll out all the different features that they can utilize, you need to test it. And so before the whole system is ever up and running, you should select what we like to call super users. And so super users are a system admin. They're a specific type of user. For us, grantees are one type of user, but they're broken down into, executive directors might use the system one way. The financial analysts might use the system a different way. And so essentially you want to identify all of your different types of users and have them test different functions within your system. Having a feedback loop for that allows you to release a piece, have someone try it, give you some sense of feedback on is it working, is it buggy, and give you time to fix it as you're training them on the next piece. And so essentially we encourage you to make a feedback loop out of this so that you can record, identify, and change the issues much more quickly than if you just roll everything out and then have to fix the entire system while everyone is in it. And so to really strategically plan for this large chunk of the process, we encourage people to use the ADDIE model. And so if you're not familiar with the ADDIE model, it basically encourages you to analyze, design, develop, implement, and then evaluate your system or your plan. So that way, along the way, you can catch issues, you can troubleshoot issues, and make sure that you're achieving what you're trying to achieve out of your system before you fully implement the system to all of your users. Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so we're going to go to the next part of the case study, which is the yellow handout, and that's the green handout, which is the during the LMS phase. So the project team sends a survey to staff to help them understand what the scope of the project will look like. They map out the major areas that they will need to build within the LMS. As part of the migration process, they look at all of the tools that they have formerly used and determine that they don't need to acquire any new hardware and software for backups or content conversion. So they begin to collect all of the physical documents that they will want to include in the future LMS and send out a message to the staff noting that a timeline for releasing the LMS will be shared soon. The project team meets again to develop the timeline for rolling out the LMS. After reviewing the content, they want to migrate the content that they need to develop. They determine that within 6 months' time, the entire system will be ready to deploy. The executive director decides that the project team should produce the new content suggested by the board before organizing and migrating existing physical documents into the LMS. In the interest of time, the project team decides that video courses would be the most engaging and ideal for their audience and begin creating the first course in that format. At the 5-month mark in the timeline, the project team sets up a 1-hour webinar to explain how to access and use the basic features of the system, logging in, uploading documents, and entering courses or modules. Even though only one complete course is ready for deployment, they give all of the staff a week to practice using the system and encourage them to record issues or problems with the system in the tech support link and email. After 3 weeks of fixing bugs in the system, the entire LMS launches with only one course. Okay, so we're going to give you 6 minutes to read through this section and talk amongst yourselves about what are some of the challenges that are arising here and how might you prevent this if this is new. So, can anyone tell me, are there any pitfalls that we noticed in the implementation phase? So for those who are joining us online, what one of the audience members said was the planning phase was way too short, absolutely correct, and they didn't really plan for any milestones. It was just, we're going to get it done. Any other pitfalls that might have come up? Or challenges that you saw in the implementation phase? Yes?
The lack of content type, shows video only, just one training course. They develop it out any further than that or any other type of content for the visual.
Right, so for those online, what the audience member said was they didn't develop very many types of content, they only chose one. They only released one course, and they didn't consider that the people who are in the learning environment need more content options and styles to learn from. Any other pitfalls that we saw?
It seems the goal got changed because the board gave them 3 specific things they wanted to see created. And then it went to, well, we're going to import the existing stuff into it.
Right, so the audience member said that the goal got changed. It went from we have 3 things we need to create to let's just import what exists. Okay. Any other challenges that we saw? Yes.
I just thought it was a bad sign that they needed an hour-long webinar.
Yes. So if you're online, someone said they thought it was a bad sign that they needed an hour-long webinar to explain how to use the system. That is one of the major red flags here. Webinar may not be enough to revisit how to use the system. You may need to chunk it. One of the things we talk about often is if you anticipate the learner's needs, they're probably going to need to revisit how do I log in, how do I reset my password, how do I do certain functions within a system, and having to watch an hour video to get to what they need probably isn't going to encourage them to use that material or resource. Yes?
In your statement, 1 hour, there is no metrics, and here stating the hour of work. I can just go ahead and play it and go outside and come back.
Exactly. So if you're online, we had a great comment from an audience member. There's no metrics on this webinar. We don't know if it was cut on and tuned out We don't know who watched the webinar. There's no way to track if they popped in, popped out. We don't know if the people who need to utilize it even watched the webinar. There's no tracking. Any other major red flags or pitfalls that we've seen that come up in this section in the implementation phase? One thing that I will point out is that there is no real training testing cycle at all here. They say, we're going to train you, you can go in, you can give us feedback. They hope they're going to find the bugs and fix the bugs, but there's no window of time to do that right before implementation. It's just, you find it, you send it, we'll fix it. That is one of the biggest frustrations on the user end of the implementation phase, if they're not fully involved in that cycle to say, this is a problem, you fix it, and then they say the problem is resolved. You gotta make sure the feedback loop actually closes. Okay, so if there aren't any more things you want to point out, we're gonna move to the post-implementation phase.
Okay, so for the last phase, and often the most ignored because we're so focused on launching and getting it off the ground that we don't think about, well, what happens afterwards. And we've heard time and time again that, you might get a grant, it's a fantastic thing, you're excited to launch it, you launch it, and then next year you're like, I can't maintain it, I can't keep it up, I don't have the capacity, I never thought about the long-term vision. And so that's why it's so important in the preliminary phases to really plan out what your strategic long-term vision looks like. So in the post-implementation phase, it's really important to establish a process to gather feedback from all the system users. I think the session in here before us was a SharePoint session. So I worked previously on system implementation, and the system we used for feedback was actually creating a SharePoint technical assistance tool, a support tool mechanism. And we would assign tickets based on system issues to the subject matter experts, and it was a consistent feedback loop. And the great thing about that ticketing system is it would serve as a metric for us to understand what some of the major issues were, and if we saw that there was a consistency in issues, we would create a training to supplement what that issue was. So establishing a regular process to gather feedback from all the system users. It could be as simple as creating a Google form and having someone monitor that Google form whenever they're experiencing a system issue, or maybe there's a course that's antiquated and they want to tell you, or there's a new policy or a new regulation that has not been updated in the system. There needs to be a feedback loop for you to learn and for also the end users to have a good experience. So this includes regular evaluation of your learning management system. Running system report outs, you could run system report outs on monthly usage, some of the issues you're finding. And because, again, if you've done it correctly, you've got a stakeholder team and you've got investment from leadership, this could be something that's brought up every month in staff meetings, or bi-monthly, for example, you would report on the efficacy of the system. Especially when you have metrics, you can look at, learners are scoring 75% and higher, and we really are starting to see difference, like your intake numbers are going up, and you see less issues happening in your organization. So you want to establish regular metrics and regular report outs. I'm always an advocate of surveying user experience, and so we don't just do a survey once and that's it. So it's really important to consistently survey your end users. And I find that anonymity works best in this case, and so if you're surveying users about their experiences in the LMS, it's really great to make it anonymous and have them really be genuine about their experiences. What's working, what's not working, what can we change? Because you don't want a stagnant system that's not going to work for you and they're not going to learn from. Find a way to evaluate the content. So not only are they evaluating the system, but what about the courses you've created? You have to think about ways in which you want them to evaluate the courses. So like we're getting ready to wrap up a course on citizenship attestation, Regulation 1626. And when we deploy, although we don't have our LMS yet, I am looking to implement a way for folks to kind of give me an evaluation of the course. Do you feel like you understand it better? I mean, I understand it, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm seeing that as a win, but I want to make sure that other folks have an opportunity to give me an evaluation or give us an evaluation of the efficacy of the course. And then reevaluate content areas. Add new content, constantly refresh it. Think about, we had something on the side earlier which we didn't necessarily go into, but gamification is a tech tool that folks use in their course design. Adobe Captivate gives you an opportunity to gamify and turn the courses into a game, so you can create like a Jeopardy component within the course that allows folks to interact with the content. You can do drag and drops, you can do other games, there's so many different things, and so you want to keep it fresh and consistently think about redesigning the information.
And in so doing that, you want to think about learning paths. That's the easiest way to change up a user experience, by thinking about what pathways could they go through to learn or reassess what they know about content.
Okay, so we're going to do the last phase of the case study, and obviously it's the shortest because post-implementation is not ordinarily the biggest lift. So, okay, so yellow sheet. After implementation, the stakeholder team congratulate themselves on a job well done, leaving open the email address for tech support. They decide to use the bi-monthly staff meetings to report out on issues with the system, and because they did not procure the system with support, they are tasked with updating the system when a new step or process in the workflow occurs. And that's it. So go through the final checklist and see what they may have missed, what they should be doing, what they should be considering. Okay, so let's come back and just talk about this last phase of implementation. So is their post-implementation plan going to be effective? No. What's missing? Everything? Yeah. Potomac Valley needs some help, right? Potomac River, sorry. What things could they do that were not done? Oh, okay. Yeah. Again, the one course is not going to cut it for an LMS. If you're putting that much money into an LMS for one course, it's not quite worth it. Yep. Yeah. Right, so they're not soliciting feedback. Maybe you'll check the email, but what do you do with that? And how are you notifying folks that there may be some issues in the system? Right. And you don't think about, like, a lot of, again, you'll create an LMS, you think the content's great, you put so much time and effort into it, but how are you checking to see if it works? And that's one of the reasons I say regularly survey your end users. Definitely annually, maybe biannually, just to survey their experience. We've added two new courses this year. Please give us an idea of whether or not you feel like this is working. What other courses would you like to see? And so, like, we've done that at LSC. We surveyed our grantee audience to figure out what gaps in learning they have and understanding and what areas they'd like to see training courses created on. And we plan to follow up on the survey actually in a couple of weeks. So we're trying to practice what we're preaching as well. Anything else before we move to questions? Yeah, so they're having bi-weekly in the staff meetings, which presumably is going to give them 2 minutes in each staff meeting to debrief, because I'm sure it's not the most important thing happening at the organization. So you'd want to set up maybe an exclusive time dedicated to debriefing on the learning management systems, informing the board, who was the original requesters of this learning management system. So it needs to be built in as an important facet of organizational development. What are some of the vendor considerations? What do you do after the vendor license expires? How will you continue with updates? I mentioned this earlier, like if you're creating content that is, it's SWF content, that's not HTML5. SWF content requires Flash. And if you're creating content in an authoring tool that's only SWF, it's not going to function at the end of this year because Flash is going out of business. So all those things are considerations that are important to think about in a post-implementation process. We're leaning towards Moodle as a vendor because it's an open source vendor, which means it's free, but you have to have someone to manage it on the back end. So we're trying to work with some vendors on implementation. Again, we haven't gotten there. We've done kind of an overview and we've looked at a variety of different platforms. My dream would be Adobe Captivate Prime because we are creating an Adobe Captivate, but Prime is something like $5 per user per month per year. And if you've got, in our case, we have 132 grantees times what, 25 users per grantee per month per year, it's over $100,000 a year.
Yeah, that's a pretty steep bill, so.
So one of the things we'll do is that in the box folder at the end of this, we'll actually post some of our processes that we undertook in terms of evaluating vendors and evaluating some systems just for you to use for yourself. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I understand you said you're looking at like your own events, but you're also creating your own content.
Yeah. Where are we hosting it?
Do you have any intent of maybe sharing those form files with people who already have their images so they can look at the results?
I mean, I have no opposition to it. If it's for you to understand the regulations, I have no problem sharing it. We're currently hosting just on our website, and the metrics we run are Google Analytics. So we're just using, again, this is just in the very beginning phases. So I have a mini module, and then I'm creating a full module, and we're hoping to add on incrementally. But we're planning on creating a landing page within our website under grantee guidance, in which we actually will have all of our learning content that we currently, not only modules, but webinars, articles,
Discussion guides.
sample policies and procedures, which we hope to then migrate into the LMS when it actually goes through. So we're going to host it there. We'll use the Google Analytics to kind of see who's coming, how often they're coming, until we can get our LMS to really give us the metrics we need. So, I mean, you can come talk to me afterwards. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we're in the very preliminary phases. Our hope is in 2021 that we'll get the approval to go through and purchase our LMS, and it'll be LSC training for everyone. So thank you so much for coming.